It wasn't a pen. It was a weapon. And I had just used it to slit my own throat. The ink was still wet on the signature line where I had scrawled Elena Vance. The letters looked sharp and precise, like the edge of a guillotine blade waiting to drop. I sat in the high-back leather chair in the corner office, listening to the expensive hum of the air conditioner. The view outside was magnificent, with Chicago spread out below me like a grid of electric jewels. But I didn't see the city lights or the prestige of my position. I saw the invisible bars of a cage closing around me, locking tight with a metallic click. Richard Sterling sat across the mahogany desk, not looking at me, but at the document I had just surrendered. He smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the expression of a predator who had just finished a satisfying meal. He slid the file into a drawer, the sound of it closing heavy and final, like a coffin lid slamming shut. "You did the right thing, Elena," he said, his voice smooth and cultured, lacking any trace of guilt. "The firm takes care of its own. You've secured your future with us, and that's what matters." I felt bile rise in my throat, hot and acidic. I wanted to scream, to lunge across the desk and tear the paper to shreds, but I remained frozen in the chair. I was paralyzed by the crushing weight of what I had just done. I had certified the safety compliance for North Creek Industries, knowing full well it was a lie. I knew the soil samples were toxic and the groundwater was poisoned. Now my name was the only guarantee stating everything was fine. I had traded my integrity for a partnership track, and the cost was already eating me alive. "I need a drink," I said, my voice sounding hollow and foreign to my own ears. It didn't sound like the confident voice of a junior partner at Sterling and Hart's. It sounded like the whisper of a ghost. Richard stood up and walked to the crystal decanter on the sidebar, pouring 2 fingers of amber liquid for himself. He didn't offer me any. He took a sip and sighed with satisfaction. "Go home, Elena. Get some rest. Tomorrow is a big day. The merger goes through thanks to you, and we need you sharp." I stood up, my legs feeling like lead weights dragging me down. I walked out of the office, past the assistants who envied me, and the associates who desperately wanted to be me. They saw a woman in a $2,000 suit, radiating success and power. They were wrong. They were looking at a walking corpse. I wasn't a partner anymore. I was a scapegoat in the making. The slaughter had just begun, and I was the only one who could hear the knives being sharpened. 3 weeks earlier I thought I owned the world. I was 30 years old and the youngest junior partner in the firm's history. I worked 80 hours a week, sacrificing everything else. I had no husband, no children, and no hobbies. I had the law. I had the thrill of the win. I had an apartment in the Loop with floor-to-ceiling windows and an empty refrigerator. I told myself it was worth it. I told myself I was building a legacy that would last. I was naive. I was stupid. I was blind. The summons had come on a Tuesday when Richard Sterling wanted to see me. That was rare. Richard was the name on the door, a legend in Chicago corporate law who didn't speak to juniors. He spoke to senators and CEOs. When his secretary called me, I thought it was a promotion or recognition for my grueling hours. I smoothed my skirt and checked my reflection in the elevator chrome. I looked ready. I looked hungry. I walked into his office with my head high, unaware I was walking into a trap. Richard was waiting with Marcus Hart, the other name on the door. 2 lions in one room and me. "Sit down, Elena," Marcus said, pointing to the hard chair in front of the desk instead of the comfortable ones by the window. That should have been my first warning. The air in the room was stale, smelling of old paper and secrets. "We have a situation," Richard said, pushing a file across the desk. "North Creek Industries. The merger with Omnicorp holds on the environmental audit. The EPA is sniffing around." I opened the file and scanned the pages, my stomach dropping with every line. The numbers were bad. Arsenic levels were off the charts, and lead was seeping into the water table. It wasn't just a violation. It was a catastrophe waiting to happen. "This is unfixable," I said, looking up at them. "You can't merge. You have to report this immediately. The fines alone will be in the millions." Richard laughed, a dry cracking sound. "We aren't paying fines, Elena. And we aren't stopping the merger. There are billions at stake." He leaned forward, his eyes cold blue ice. "We need a new audit. An independent review. Signed by a partner." I understood then. They didn't need a lawyer. They needed a shield. You want me to sign off on false data? I asked, my voice quiet. That's fraud. That's a felony. Marcus chimed in, his voice softer and more manipulative. It's not fraud, Elena. It's interpretation. We have experts who say these levels are within acceptable variance. We just need a legal opinion to back them up. I won't do it, I said, starting to close the file. Find someone else. Richard's face changed instantly. The mask of civility dropped. There is no one else. You are the lead on this account. You drafted the preliminary briefs. You are already tied to this. He pulled another paper from a folder. It was a transcript of my emails and drafts. Edited. Context removed. It looked bad. It looked like I knew about the pollution months ago. If this goes down, Elena, you go down. We have plausible deniability. You don't. The room spun as I realized the depth of the betrayal. It was a setup. They had been grooming me for this, feeding me the North Creek files and letting me put my initials on the minor paperwork. If you sign, Marcus said soothingly, the merger goes through. The stock jumps. Your bonus will be substantial. Enough to pay off your law school loans and buy a house in the suburbs. You'll be a senior partner by 35. And if I don't? I asked. Then we release the internal investigation, Richard said. We fire you for negligence. That was the moment. The fork in the road. I could have walked out. I could have gone to the police. I could have been brave. But I was scared. I was terrified of losing everything I had built. I defined myself by my job. Without the firm, who was I? I was nobody. So I took the pen. I took the weapon. And I signed. Now 3 weeks later, the bomb exploded. It started with a phone call at 6:00 a.m. from the Chicago Tribune. Do you have a comment on the North Creek indictment? I drove to the office, instinct taking over. I had to fix this. I had to explain. When I swiped my badge at the lobby turnstile, the light flashed red. Access denied. The security guard, Frank, stepped in front of me looking embarrassed. I'm sorry, Miss Vance. I can't let you up. He pointed to a box on the floor. It was a cardboard box containing a framed degree, a stapler, and a coffee mug. 5 years of blood, sweat, and 80-hour weeks reduced to a pile of junk. I need to see Richard, I demanded, but the HR director, Karen, appeared with 2 uniformed police officers. Elena Vance? One officer asked. We have a warrant for your arrest. The lobby went silent. People stopped walking. The receptionist stopped typing. Everyone looked. I felt their eyes burning holes in my skin. The handcuffs were cold as they bit into my wrists. They weren't just restraints. They were brands marking me as a criminal, a failure, a fraud. I saw Richard then, standing on the mezzanine level looking down. He was holding a coffee cup, watching the police read me my rights. He watched them push my head down to get me into the squad car. He didn't look guilty. He looked bored. He turned away before the car door slammed. The holding cell smelled of bleach and urine. I sat on the metal bench, stripped of my armor. I was just a woman in a cage. My father, a retired judge, didn't answer my call. I was a stain on his name. The bail hearing was a blur. The prosecutor painted me as a mastermind, a greedy corporate climber who poisoned a town for a bonus. My public defender was a kid who barely looked at the files. Plead guilty, he whispered. Cut a deal. They have your signature. I was coerced. I hissed. Can you prove it? He asked. Do you have recordings? I had nothing. Richard had been careful. The meetings were verbal. The files were physical. I posted bail with my savings. All of it. I went back to my apartment. The doorman looked away. The apartment wasn't a home anymore. It was a mausoleum of my former life. I poured a glass of cheap vodka and sat on the floor, watching the shadows lengthen. I thought about ending it. One step off the balcony. Gravity would solve everything. But then I saw the box from the lobby lying on its side. My framed law degree lay face down, the glass cracked. A jagged line ran through my name. Elena Vance. I crawled over and picked it up. I ran my finger over the crack, and it drew a drop of blood. I watched the red bead form on my fingertip. It was bright, real, alive. Something snapped inside me. It wasn't a break. It was a realignment. I remembered who I was. I wasn't just a signature. I wasn't just a scapegoat. I was the top of my class at Yale. I knew the corporate code better than the Bible. I knew where the bodies were buried because I had helped dig the graves. Richard thought I was weak. He thought I was a good little soldier who would fall on her sword. He thought he had taken everything from me. He was wrong. He had left me with one thing. The only thing that mattered. He had left me with nothing to lose. I stood up and wiped the blood on my ruined suit. I went to the bathroom and washed my face. The woman in the mirror looked terrible, but the fear in her eyes was gone. In its place was something cold, hard, geometric. I went to my closet and pulled out my backup drive, the one I kept encrypted in a hollowed-out book. Richard was careful but arrogant. He thought he controlled the servers, forgetting that I wrote the retention policy. I didn't have recordings, but I had the metadata. I had the access logs. I knew who opened the North Creek files and when. I wasn't going to defend myself. Defense was for victims. I was going to attack. But first I needed a plan. The next morning the eviction notice came. The bank was calling the mortgage. Standard clause. Criminal indictment triggered a default. They wanted me on the street. Good. Let them come. I packed one bag, taking the hard drive, my laptop, and the cracked diploma. I walked out the service entrance into the rain. I took the train south, away from the Gold Coast and the money, getting off at a stop where the buildings were low and the windows were barred. I found a motel with a buzzing neon sign. The clerk didn't ask for ID, just cash. I gave him my last $200. The room smelled of stale smoke, but I didn't care. I put the laptop on the wobbly desk and plugged in the drive. I opened the file labeled Partnership Agreement Bylaws. Most associates never read the bylaws, but I had memorized them. There was a clause. Subsection 14C. The Rogue Agent Protocol. It was designed to protect the firm, but it had a loophole. If a partner is accused of a felony involving firm clients, any minority shareholder can trigger an external audit of the entire client roster. I wasn't an employee. I was an owner. My shares had vested 24 hours before they fired me, and in their haste they hadn't bought me out. I still owned 0.5% of Sterling and Hearts. I was about to call for an audit of everything. Every bribe. Every buried scandal. "Hello, Richard," I whispered to the empty room. "Let's play." But before I could file the motion, I needed leverage. The audit was the nuke. You don't drop the nuke on the first day. I needed to find the weak link. David Thorne, the CFO, the man who moved the money. He had a gambling problem and a mistress, and he was terrified of Richard Sterling. I pulled up his file and started typing. I wasn't writing a legal brief. I was writing a script for a con. I cut my hair and dyed it black in the motel sink. I put on heavy makeup and a leather jacket from a thrift store. Elena Vance, the lawyer, was dead. This was someone new. Someone dangerous. I walked out into the rain, hailing a cab. "West Loop," I said. "The meatpacking district." The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Rough neighborhood, lady." "I'm looking for trouble," I said. The warehouse was a carcass of brick and rusted steel sitting on the edge of the meatpacking district, where the smell of old blood never quite washed away. There were no lights and no signs, just a heavy metal door, and a man the size of a refrigerator standing in front of it. I walked up to him without breaking my stride, knowing that hesitation is a scent that dogs and bouncers can smell from a mile away. I held out a $50 bill folded into a tight square. "Game's inside," I said, pitching my voice lower and rougher than my usual courtroom alto. He took the money, glancing not at my face but at my hands, checking for a badge. He saw chipped black nail polish and a cheap ring I'd bought an hour ago. He grunted, stepped aside, and pulled the heavy door open. The noise hit me first, a chaotic mix of clattering chips, the hum of tense conversation, and thumping bass that was too loud for a Tuesday night. Then the smell washed over me, cigarette smoke, cheap cologne, and the thick metallic tang of desperation. I stepped into the shadows, pulling the collar of my leather jacket up to hide the curve of my jaw. There were 5 tables, most full of low-level hustlers and guys trying to lose their paychecks away from their wives. But the table in the back was different. The felt was green, the chips were black, and the mood was serious. And there he was, David Thorne, the CFO of Sterling and Hearts. The man who had signed my paychecks for 5 years and knew where every dirty dollar was buried. He looked terrible. His tie was loosened, his top button undone, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the chill in the drafty room. It wasn't the heat. It was the cold sweat of a man who is drowning. He had a stack of chips in front of him, but it was a small stack and he was staring at it like it was his last lifeline. I walked to the cage and exchanged my last $200 for chips. For red chips. That was it. That was my entire net worth. I wasn't just playing poker. I was playing Russian roulette with my life. I walked to the table and pulled out the empty chair directly across from David. The legs scraped against the concrete floor. A sharp sound that made heads turn. "Seats open?" I asked, sitting down before anyone could object. The dealer was an old man with dead eyes who just nodded. "Buy-in is $500, he rasped. I put my 4 chips on the felt and stared him down. "I'm short, but I'm lucky." The man to my left laughed. A guy wearing a gold chain and a tracksuit that cost more than my car. "Let the girl play," he sneered. "Fresh meat." David didn't look up. He was staring at his cards, trembling slightly. He was terrified, but not of the game. He was terrified of what was waiting for him outside. I watched his hands. I knew those hands. I had seen them sign billion-dollar merger agreements. Now they couldn't even hold a pair of cards steady. The cards were dealt, 2 down to each player. I didn't look at mine immediately. I watched David. He peeked at his hand and his pupils dilated. A tell. He had something, or he thought he did. I looked at mine. Jack of spades. 10 of spades. Possibility. The flop came. Ace of spades, king of spades, 2 of clubs. David bet immediately, pushing a stack of black chips forward. It was aggressive. Too aggressive. He was trying to buy the pot, trying to bully the table because he needed a win desperately. The other players folded, sensing a desperate man flailing and not wanting to get hit by the debris. It was just me and him. I didn't touch my chips. I stared at him, willing him to look at me. "I call," I said. He finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused. He looked right through me. He saw the black hair, the dark makeup, the leather jacket. He didn't see Elena Vance. He didn't see the junior partner. He saw a stranger. The turn was the 9 of spades. I had a flush draw and a straight draw. I had outs. David bet again. "All in," he said, his voice cracking. It was thousands of dollars. If I called and lost, I was done. I would be sleeping on the street. I looked at the board, then back at David. He was holding his breath. He was bluffing. He didn't have the ace. He was playing on fear. "I call," I said, pushing my meager stack forward. He flinched like I had slapped him. The river card snapped onto the felt. Queen of spades. Bingo. Royal flush. The odds were astronomical, impossible, destiny. David slammed his cards down. Pair of eights. Garbage. I turned my cards over slowly, one by one. The table went silent. The man in the tracksuit let out a low whistle. "Damn, lady. That's cold." David stared at the cards, his face going gray. All the color drained out of him. He wasn't just broke. He was broken. I raked in the chips. It was a mountain. More money than I had made in a month at the firm. But I didn't care about the money. I cared about the man. David stood up, swaying slightly. He looked like he was going to vomit. He turned and walked toward the back exit, toward the bathrooms. I waited 5 seconds, letting the panic settle in. Then I followed him. The hallway was narrow and covered in graffiti. I heard the sound of retching from behind the men's room door. Pushed it open. David was bent over the sink, splashing gray water onto his face, sobbing quiet, jagged sobs. I stepped inside and locked the door behind me. The click echoed in the tiled room like a gunshot. David spun around, water dripping from his chin. "Hey, this is the men's room. Get out." I didn't move. I stood in front of the door with my arms crossed. "Look at me, David," I said, dropping the rough accent and using my courtroom voice, the voice that destroyed witnesses on cross-examination. He froze, squinting through the gloom. He wiped the water from his eyes. "Elena," he whispered. It was a question and a prayer. "Hello, David. Rough night." He backed away until he hit the wall. No, you're in jail. I saw on the news. You're gone. I'm back, I said, stepping closer. And I want my life back. I can't help you, he stammered, shaking his head. Richard will kill me. Richard is going to kill you anyway, I said coldly. Look at you. You're a mess. You're gambling away the hush money. How long before he realizes you're a liability? A week? A day? David slid down the wall until he was sitting on the dirty floor, his head in his hands. I didn't want to do it. He made me. He has photos, Elena. Me and her. My wife would take the kids. She would take everything. I don't care about your wife, I said. I care about the audit. I care about the fake soil samples. I care that I am facing 10 years in prison for a crime you committed. I crouched down so I was eye level with him. I know about the loophole, David. I know I still own shares. I'm going to trigger a full external audit. I'm going to burn Sterling and Hearts to the ground. His head snapped up, terror in his eyes. You can't. You don't understand. It's not just North Creek. What? I asked. North Creek is the tip of the iceberg, he whispered, his eyes darting around the room as if the walls had ears. It's the pension fund. The police union pension fund. Richard has been siphoning from it for 5 years. Ponzi scheme. He's using the merger money to plug the hole before the quarterly review. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just corporate fraud. This was stealing from cops. If this came out, Richard wouldn't just go to jail. He would be dead. And anyone who knew about it would be dead too. You have proof? I asked. Not on the servers, he said. Richard wiped everything. He has a guy in IT. Professional cleaner. There's always a record, David. You're an accountant. You don't flush numbers without keeping a backup. He hesitated, biting his lip. He was weighing his fear of Richard against his fear of me. I leaned in closer. I can protect you, David. I can get you a deal. Immunity. But I need the ledger. Now. He closed his eyes and exhaled, a sound of defeat. It's not digital. It's paper. The shadow ledger. Kept it. Insurance. Where is it? My boat, he said. The Lady Luck. Montrose Harbor. Slip 42. It's in the floor safe under the captain's chair. Code 0-5-2-4, he said. My daughter's birthday. Pathetic. The man who stole millions used a birthday for a combination. Stay here, I said, standing up. Don't leave this bathroom. Don't call anyone. If you leave, Richard finds you. If you stay, I come back for you. Elena, he grabbed my wrist, his hand clammy. Be careful. Richard has security. Private security. Ex-military. They watched the boat. I know, I said, pulling my hand away. I'm counting on it. I walked out of the bathroom and back into the casino to cash out my chips. The cashier handed me a thick envelope. $5,000. I walked out into the night. The rain had stopped and the air was crisp. I felt alive. I had money. I had a target. I had the combination to the safe. But I needed one more thing. I needed a distraction. I hailed a cab. Montrose Harbor, I said. The driver looked at me. Bit late for a boat ride, miss. I'm not going for a ride, I said, staring out at the city lights. I'm going fishing. The harbor was quiet when I arrived, the masts of the sailboats clinking in the wind like wind chimes in a graveyard. The Lady Luck was a 40-foot cruiser, white fiberglass glowing in the moonlight. I didn't go to the gate. I went to the perimeter fence and climbed over, my boots hitting the gravel silently. David was right. There was a black SUV parked near the slip. Engine idling. Lights off. Security. I couldn't just walk up. I needed them gone. I looked around and spotted a fuel dock about 50 yards away. Gas cans. Rags. I smiled. I wasn't an arsonist. But I was adaptable. I crept toward the fuel dock and soaked a rag in gasoline. I found an old metal trash can, threw the rag in and lit a match. The flame flared up, bright orange in the dark night. I kicked the can over, and the fire spilled onto the wooden dock. Fire! I screamed, pitching my voice high and panicked. Fire at the fuel dock! The door of the black SUV flew open and 2 men jumped out. They were big, wearing tactical gear with guns on their hips. They ran toward the flames. They were professionals, but fire triggers a primitive instinct. Panic first. Think later. I sprinted in the opposite direction toward slip 42. My footsteps were silent on the wet concrete. I reached the boat and jumped onto the swim platform. I picked the lock on the cabin door. A skill I had learned on YouTube the night I was disbarred. The cabin smelled of teak oil and stale whiskey. I found the captain's chair and pulled up the carpet. There it was. The safe. My fingers hovered over the keypad. 0-5-2-4. Green light. Click. I opened the heavy door and found a single black notebook inside. Leather-bound. I grabbed it and shoved it into my jacket. I turned to leave, but then I heard it. The sound of boots on the deck. Heavy. Fast. They were back. They had realized the fire was a diversion. Check the cabin, a voice shouted. Rough. Gravelly. I was trapped. I looked around. No back exit. One door. And two armed men coming through it. I looked at the floor and saw the engine hatch. I lifted it. The engine block was hot and smelled of diesel. It was a tight squeeze. I dropped down and pulled the hatch cover back into place just as the cabin door burst open. The engine roared to life next to my ear. A deafening mechanical scream that vibrated through my bones. I clenched my teeth to keep them from rattling. The guards weren't searching anymore. They were moving the boat. Boss wants it at the private pier. The gravelly voice shouted over the noise. Get the lines. This was it. If the boat moved out into the open water, I was dead. If they found me here, I was dead. I had seconds. I waited for the heavy thud of boots moving toward the stern to untie the ropes. I pushed the hatch cover up just an inch. The cabin was empty. The air was cool compared to the hellish heat of the engine block. I scrambled out, clutching the black notebook like a lifeline. I didn't go for the door. That was a fatal funnel. I went for the window. It was small, a porthole designed for ventilation. Not for exiting, but adrenaline is a powerful lubricant. I shoved the notebook into my jacket, zipped it to my chin and squeezed through. My hips scraped against the metal frame, bruising skin, but I didn't feel it. I tumbled out onto the narrow side deck. The guard was 10 feet away, his back to me, wrestling with a stubborn knot on the cleat. The boat was already drifting away from the dock. The gap was widening. 3 feet. 4 feet. I didn't think. I jumped. I didn't aim for the dock. I aimed for the black gap between the wood and the water. I hit the surface with a splash that was swallowed by the engine's roar. The water was a hammer blow. Freezing. Lake Michigan in October is liquid ice. It punched the air from my lungs and seized my muscles. I sank into the dark, oily water, forcing myself to stay under. I kicked hard, swimming beneath the pylons of the pier. Above me, the boat engines revved, and the Lady Luck pulled away, taking David Thorne's secrets and my pursuers into the night. They hadn't seen me. I was just another ripple in the harbor. I surfaced under the pier, gasping for air that smelled of rot and gasoline. My teeth chattered so hard I bit my tongue. I dragged myself up onto the wooden crossbeams, shivering violently. I was alive. I was freezing wet and terrified, but I was alive. And I had the book. I checked my jacket. The leather notebook was dry enough. The water hadn't ruined the ink. I waited there for 10 minutes, listening to the sirens in the distance, the fire department finally responding to my diversion. When the coast was clear, I climbed up a maintenance ladder at the end of the pier and vanished into the shadows of the park. I needed heat. I needed light. And I needed anonymity. I found a 24-hour laundromat 3 blocks inland. It was a fluorescent purgatory of spinning drums and flickering lights. A lone janitor was mopping the floor. He didn't even look up as I stumbled in, dripping water onto his clean tile. I stripped off my leather jacket and my soaked clothes in the bathroom, putting on the spare oversized hoodie I had stuffed in my waterproof bag. I threw my wet clothes into a dryer and sat on a plastic chair, opening the black notebook. It was a graveyard of numbers. David Thorne had been meticulous. Every page was a date, a name, and an amount. I traced the columns with a trembling finger. NCI $2 million. Pension transfer $5 million. Consulting fee $500,000. It wasn't just a Ponzi scheme. It was a sophisticated laundering operation. Richard wasn't just stealing from the police pension fund. He was using North Creek Industries to cover the holes. He was poisoning the ground to pay for his theft. I turned the page and froze. There was a list of names under beneficiaries. I recognized them: judges, city council members, the police commissioner. This was why Richard was untouchable. He hadn't just bought the law. He had bought the people who enforced it. If I went to the police, I would never make it to the precinct. The commissioner was on page 42, receiving $50,000 a month. I felt a cold knot of dread in my stomach. I was holding a nuclear bomb, but I had no delivery system. I couldn't file a lawsuit. The judges were on the payroll. I couldn't go to the cops. They were the victims and the accomplices. I was completely alone in a city that wanted me dead. Then I remembered the phone call. The reporter from the Tribune, Rachel Cross. She had called me at 6:00 a.m. the day my life ended. She had sounded hungry, aggressive, the type of reporter who hated corporate lawyers, the type who would sell her soul for a Pulitzer. I opened my laptop. It connected to the laundromat's weak Wi-Fi. I searched for her name. Her articles were sharp, cynical, and focused on corruption. She had written a piece last year accusing Sterling and Hartz of bullying small businesses. Richard had sued the paper for libel, and she had been forced to retract it. She didn't just want a story. She wanted revenge. I found her encrypted email address on a whistleblower forum. I started typing. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I have the proof you were looking for last year. The North Creek audit was fake. But that's just the cover-up. The real story is the police pension fund. I have the ledger. I have the names. Meet me. Come alone. I didn't sign it Elena Vance. I signed it Cassandra, the prophetess who spoke the truth but was never believed. I hit send. The message vanished into the digital void. I waited. The dryer buzzed, signaling the end of the cycle. My leather jacket was warm and stiff. I put it back on. Felt like armor. The laptop pinged. A reply. Fast. Who is this? I typed back. The scapegoat. Another pause. Then? Where? I looked around. I couldn't stay here. It was too exposed. The diner on Wacker. The one under the tracks. 1 hour. If I see a cop, the ledger goes into the river. I packed my bag. The walk to the diner was a blur of paranoia. Every headlight was a police car. Every pedestrian was a hitman. I gripped the notebook so hard my knuckles turned white. The diner was a relic of the 1950s, smelling of grease and old coffee. It was empty except for a trucker sleeping in a booth. I sat in the back facing the door. I ordered black coffee. The waitress looked at my dyed black hair and the dark circles under my eyes and didn't ask questions. She just poured the coffee and walked away. 40 minutes later, the door opened. Rachel Cross walked in. She looked exactly like her bio photo. Sharp features, messy hair, tired eyes. She wore a trench coat and carried a messenger bag. She scanned the room. Her eyes landed on me. She paused. She recognized me even with the black hair. She walked over and slid into the booth opposite me. She didn't say hello. She just looked at me with a mixture of shock and suspicion. Elena Vance, she whispered. You're supposed to be under house arrest. I'm supposed to be a lot of things, I said. My voice was steady. I'm supposed to be the villain. I'm supposed to be silent. I pulled the black notebook out of my jacket. I placed it on the table. I kept my hand on it. This is the shadow ledger. It proves Richard Sterling has stolen $300 million from the Chicago Police Pension Fund. Rachel stared at the book. Her breath hitched. She reached for it. I pulled it back. Not yet, I said. We make a deal. You write the story, but you publish it on my terms. And you get me protection. Protection? Rachel scoffed. I'm a journalist, not the FBI. I can't protect you from Sterling. If this is true, he'll burn the city down to find you. I don't need the FBI, I said. I need the spotlight. I need this story to be so big, so loud that killing me would be a confession. I leaned forward. Richard thinks he's a king. I'm going to show the world he's just a thief. Rachel looked at me. She saw the change. She didn't see the corporate lawyer who defended polluters. She saw the wolf. She smiled, and it was a sharp, dangerous smile. "Okay, Elena," she said. "Let's burn him down. Show me the book." I slid the notebook across the Formica table. She opened it. Her eyes widened as she read the first page. She pulled out a voice recorder. "Start from the beginning," she said. "Don't leave anything out." I took a sip of the bitter coffee. "It started with a pen," I said. "It started with a signature. And then I told her everything. I gave her the map to the bodies. We spent 4 hours in that booth. By the time we finished, the sun was coming up. The city was waking up. People were going to work, unaware that the ground beneath them was about to shake." Rachel closed her notebook. "I can have this online by noon," she said. "But we need a physical copy of the data. The ledger is great, but we need the digital trail to corroborate it." "I have the metadata," I said. "But the actual bank transfers, those are on Richard's private server. The one in his penthouse." Rachel shook her head. "We can't get that. That's a fortress." "I know," I said. "But I have his schedule. Tonight is the merger celebration. The gala. Everyone will be there. Richard, Marcus, the security team." I looked out the window at the rising sun. "The penthouse will be empty." "You're crazy," Rachel whispered. "You're not a cat burglar. You're a lawyer." "I'm not a lawyer anymore," I said. I stood up. "I'm a majority shareholder protecting my investment." It was a lie, but it sounded good. I needed one more piece of evidence to nail the coffin shut. The ledger was the map, but the server was the treasure. "Publish the teaser," I told her. "Release the news that an anonymous source has the ledger. Make him panic. Make him sloppy." Rachel nodded. She was terrified, but she was hooked. "And what are you going to do?" she asked. I pulled my collar up. "I'm going to get dressed for a party." The dress cost $2,000. It was a resale steel vintage Valentino, black as a funeral shroud. I paid for it with the poker money, leaving me with exactly $40 to my name. It didn't matter. If tonight went well, I would be rich. If it went badly, I wouldn't need money where I was going. I pulled my dyed black hair into a severe chignon and painted my lips blood red. The woman in the mirror wasn't Elena the lawyer. She was a wraith, a vengeance spirit in silk. I checked the hard drive one last time. It was small, cold, and empty, ready to be filled with the poison that would kill a king. I walked into the lobby of the Sterling Tower at 8:00 p.m. The air smelled of expensive perfume and ozone. The gala was in the grand ballroom on the second floor. A sea of tuxedos and diamonds celebrating the merger of the century. I didn't go to the ballroom. I walked straight to the private elevators. Security was tight, but I wasn't an intruder. I was a ghost. I scanned a cloned keycard I had made 3 years ago for emergency weekend filings. The light turned green. Access granted. I stepped inside and the doors slid shut, sealing me in a steel coffin ascending to heaven. As the elevator climbed, my phone vibrated against my thigh. 8:05 p.m. The notification lit up the screen. Breaking. Whistleblower exposes police pension fraud at Sterling and Hart's. Rachel had pushed the button. Downstairs in the ballroom, 200 phones were lighting up simultaneously. I imagined the sound, the ripple of confusion, the silence falling over the room as Richard Sterling realized his empire was burning. I smiled. It was a cold, cruel smile. The chaos was my cover. While everyone looked at their screens, nobody was watching the penthouse. The elevator opened into the penthouse foyer. It was silent. The air was conditioned to a sterile chill. Richard's apartment was a museum of modern art and ego. White marble floors. Chrome statues. No photos of family. No warmth. I moved quickly, my heels silent on the thick rugs. I knew where the server was. It wasn't in the office. It was in the panic room hidden behind the master bedroom closet. Richard was paranoid. He kept his dirty laundry where he thought it was safest. I pushed aside the rows of Italian suits and found the hidden panel. The panic room door required a biometric scan. A fingerprint. I didn't have Richard's finger. But I had his vanity. I knew the manual override code. 1-9-8-5. The year he made his first million. I punched it in. The keypad beeped. Error. My heart stopped. He had changed it. Of course he had changed it. I stared at the keypad. I had 3 attempts before the silent alarm tripped and summoned the private security team from the lobby. Think, Elena. What does a narcissist love more than his money? Himself. I tried his birth year. Error. 2 strikes. Sweat prickled on my spine. I closed my eyes. I thought about Richard. I thought about the passwords he used for his email. They were always about power. About winning. Then I remembered a drunken toast he gave 5 years ago at a retreat. To the apex. Always be the apex. I typed in the numbers corresponding to APX. 2-7-3-9. The light turned green. The heavy steel door hissed open. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I stepped into the darkness. The server room was small and freezing. Banks of blue lights blinked in the dark like the eyes of deep-sea fish. This was the brain of the beast. I plugged my drive into the main terminal. The screen flared to life. Password required. I didn't need the password. I had the admin backdoor I had installed myself during the compliance overhaul 2 years ago. I typed the command code. The screen flooded with data. Bank transfers. Wire confirmations. The Cayman accounts. It was all here. The digital blood trail linking the stolen pension funds to North Creek. I started the download. A progress bar appeared. 10%. 20%. It was agonizingly slow. I paced the small room. I checked my watch. 8:15 p.m. Downstairs, Richard would be spinning the narrative. He would be claiming the article was fake news. He would be trying to leave. He would be coming here. To check his insurance policy. To destroy the evidence. I watched the bar crawl. 50%. 60%. Come on. Faster. I could hear the phantom ticking of a clock in my head. 75%. My phone buzzed again. A text from Rachel. He's leaving the ballroom. He looks furious. He's heading to the elevators with security. I froze. The elevators took 40 seconds to reach the penthouse. I had maybe 2 minutes. 80%. I couldn't stop the download. If I pulled the drive now, the data would be corrupted. I had to wait. I had to hold the line. I stood in front of the screen willing the numbers to move. 85%. 90%. Then I heard it. The chime. The elevator arriving in the foyer. Steps on the marble. Heavy. Fast. He wasn't alone. I heard the scuff of tactical boots. The security team. Check the perimeter, Richard's voice boomed. It wasn't the smooth voice of the partner anymore. It was the roar of a wounded animal. Find out who leaked that report. I want them dead. 95%. I was trapped in a concrete box with no exit. The only way out was through them. I looked around the panic room. There was a gun safe on the wall. Locked. There was a desk. A chair. Nothing to fight with. I was unarmed against a hit squad. 98%. I grabbed the hard drive, my hand hovering over the port. The footsteps were getting closer to the bedroom. Boss, the panic room door is ajar, a voice said. 99%. Clear it, Richard ordered. And if anyone is in there, shoot first. 100%. Download complete. I ripped the drive out. I shoved it into the bodice of my dress. The door to the panic room was wide open. There was nowhere to hide. I stood up. I smoothed my dress. I turned to face the door just as a man with a gun stepped into the frame. He aimed at my chest. Contact, he yelled. Richard pushed past him. He stopped. He stared at me. His face went purple. Elena, he whispered. You're dead. I didn't flinch. I didn't beg. I looked him in the eye. I'm not dead, Richard. I'm the executioner. I held up my phone. I had set it to the camera app recording video. Say hello to the cloud, Richard. Everything happening here is being live-streamed to the Tribune's server. Richard froze. The gun wavered. He looked at the phone. He looked at me. He realized the trap had already sprung. It was a bluff. The signal in the panic room was dead. I wasn't streaming anything. But Richard didn't know that. He lived in a world of image. He was terrified of the camera. Put the gun down, he hissed to his guard. Don't shoot her on camera, you idiot. The guard lowered the weapon slightly. That was my window. I didn't run. I didn't fight. I walked past them. I walked right through the door with the confidence of a queen. Stop her! Richard screamed, realizing the mistake as I passed the threshold of the room where the signal would return. But I was already in the bedroom. I grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the vanity and smashed the bedroom window. The glass shattered outward, raining down onto the city below. The alarm blared. A siren wail that shattered the tension. Fire! I screamed. I wasn't waiting for the elevator. I stepped onto the balcony. The wind whipped my dress. I looked down. 50 stories. Death. But there was a window washer's rig parked 3 floors down. I didn't think. I climbed over the railing. The wind at 500 feet was a physical weight, a cold hand trying to peel me off the building. I didn't look down at the grid of streetlights that looked like a computer chip from hell. I looked at the metal basket swaying in the gale 3 floors below. It was a window washer's rig, parked for the night, suspended by steel cables that looked impossibly thin. I climbed over the glass railing of the balcony. My dress whipped around my legs, a black silk flag of surrender. Richard was screaming something behind me, but the wind tore his words away. I took a breath. I didn't pray. I calculated. Velocity. Trajectory. Impact. Then I let go. I fell. For 1 second I was weightless. I was nothing. Then gravity slammed me into the metal grate of the rig. The impact knocked the wind out of me. My shoulder screamed in agony. The rig swung violently, banging against the glass facade of the skyscraper with a deafening crack. I scrambled for a handhold, my fingernails scraping against the cold aluminum. I was dangling over the abyss. I pulled myself up, gasping, shaking, adrenaline flooding my veins like battery acid. Above me, I saw Richard leaning over the balcony. He looked small, tiny, a toy tyrant in a tuxedo. He was shouting at his guards, pointing down. He couldn't shoot. Not with the gala going on below. Not with the cameras everywhere in the city. But he could cut the line. I saw a guard pull a knife. They were going to sever the cables. I didn't have time to figure out the rig's controls. I grabbed the heavy squeegee bucket left by the workers. It was weighted with water. I swung it with both hands, using my entire body as a fulcrum. I smashed it against the window of the 47th floor. The safety glass spiderwebbed but didn't break. I swung again. And again. Scream. Smash. Scream. Smash. The glass shattered. I tumbled through the jagged hole, landing on a plush carpet in a dark office. I rolled, ignoring the shards of glass slicing into my arms. I was inside. I was alive. I scrambled to my feet. The office was empty. A law firm. Irony. I ran to the door, bursting into the hallway. The emergency lights were humming. I found the stairwell. I didn't take the elevator. Richard would shut them down. I took the stairs. 47 flights. In heels. I kicked the shoes off. I ran barefoot. Down. 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 My lungs burned. My legs felt like lead. But I could hear the echoes of boots on the stairs above me. They were coming. I burst out of the service exit into the alleyway at ground level. The air smelled of garbage and exhaust. It was the sweetest perfume I had ever smelled. My feet were bleeding. My dress was torn. I looked like a survivor of a war zone. In a way I was. I scanned the street. A dark sedan was idling at the curb 3 doors down. The headlights flashed once. Rachel. I sprinted toward the car. The rear door flew open before I even reached it. I dove into the back seat, curling into a ball as the tires screeched against the asphalt. Go! I screamed. Rachel was in the passenger seat. Her partner, a grim-faced photographer named Ben, was driving. He floored it. The car merged into the traffic on Wacker Drive, disappearing into the sea of red taillights. I sat up, clutching my chest, trying to force air into my lungs. Rachel looked at me. Her eyes widened. You're bleeding, she said. She handed me a towel. Did you get it? I reached into my dress. I pulled out the hard drive. It was warm from my body heat. I got it, I rasped. I got everything. Rachel grabbed her laptop. She plugged in the drive. Her fingers flew across the keys. Verifying, she muttered. Holy shit. Elena, this is nuclear. She turned the screen to me. It was the bank transfer log. The date matched the withdrawal from the police pension fund. The recipient matched a shell company owned by North Creek. It was the smoking gun. It was the bullet. Upload it, I said. Now, before they scrubbed the servers. Rachel hit a key. A progress bar appeared. Uploading to the cloud. Sending to the AP, the Times, and the FBI Cybercrimes Division. I watched the bar fill up. 100%. Sent. It was done. The silence in the car was heavy. We had just declared war on one of the most powerful men in Chicago. What now? Ben asked from the driver's seat. I looked out the window. We were passing the Sterling Tower. I saw the lights of the gala still blazing on the second floor. I saw the blue and red lights of police cars starting to converge on the entrance. They weren't coming for me. They were coming for the fire alarm I pulled. But soon, they would be coming for the man in the penthouse. Now, I said, leaning back against the seat, feeling the exhaustion crash over me like a wave. Now we watch him burn. I closed my eyes. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty, hollowed out. I had destroyed my career. I had destroyed my firm. I had destroyed my mentor. I was a traitor. Pariah. But then I touched the crack screen of my phone. I saw the notification. The story was live. The comments were pouring in. Justice. Finally. Hero. I wasn't a traitor. I was a cleaner. I had scrubbed the stain out of the fabric of the city. We drove to a safe house in the suburbs. A motel that Rachel used for sources. I took a shower. The water ran pink with blood and hair dye. I scrubbed until my skin was raw. I put on clean clothes, jeans and a sweater Rachel had brought. I sat on the edge of the bed and turned on the TV. It was happening. Breaking news. Helicopters circling the Sterling Tower. A reporter standing in front of the building, shouting over the noise. Federal agents are entering the building. Unconfirmed reports of massive fraud. Richard Sterling has not been seen. The door to the motel room opened. Rachel walked in. She held 2 bottles of cheap beer. She handed me one. You did it, she said. The commissioner just resigned. The mayor is calling for an emergency inquiry. Sterling stock has dropped 40% in the last hour. She clinked her bottle against mine. To Elena Vance, the woman who burned down the house. I took a sip. It tasted bitter. To the phoenix, I corrected her. Because I'm rising from the ashes. But the night wasn't over. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated. Richard. No, he was busy shredding documents. I answered it. Hello. A voice spoke. Calm. Professional. Ms. Vance? This is Agent Miller, FBI. We have your data. We have your statement. We need you to come in. I gripped the phone. Am I under arrest? There was a pause. No, ma'am. You're a material witness. And we have an offer. The DOJ is interested in your cooperation. Full immunity. In exchange for testimony against everyone. Not just Sterling. All of them. I looked at Rachel. She nodded. She knew. This was the end game. I wasn't going to prison. I was going to the witness stand. I was going to finish what I started. I'll come in, I said. But on my terms. Name them, the agent said. I looked at the TV screen. I saw Richard Sterling being led out of the building in handcuffs. He looked old. Defeated. He looked at the camera and for a split second I swear he looked right at me. I want to walk into the courtroom through the front door, I said. No back entrances. No hiding. I want him to see me coming. The day of the trial was cold. A biting Chicago wind swept the streets clean. But it couldn't clear the crowd gathered on the steps of the federal courthouse. There were cameras. There were protesters. There were microphones eager to catch a soundbite of the tragedy. I stepped out of the black SUV. I didn't wear a hood. I didn't wear sunglasses. I wore a white suit. Sharp. Immaculate. A beacon in the sea of gray coats. I walked up the stairs. The flashbulbs popped like lightning in a storm, blinding and relentless. I didn't blink. I kept my eyes fixed on the heavy brass doors. Agent Miller walked beside me, a silent shadow, but I didn't need him. I wasn't walking to my execution. I was walking to my coronation. The courtroom was packed. Every seat was filled with reporters, victims from North Creek, and the curious vultures who feed on the downfall of the powerful. I walked down the center aisle. The sound of my heels on the parquet floor was a steady rhythm. Click, click, click. I took my seat at the witness stand. I raised my right hand. I swore to tell the truth. And then I looked at the defense table. Richard Sterling was sitting there. He looked smaller than I remembered. His suit didn't fit right. His skin was gray. He looked up at me and his eyes were empty. The lion had lost his teeth. The emperor had no clothes. He wasn't a monster anymore. He was just a defendant. The prosecutor was a woman named Hayes. Sharp as a razor. She walked me through the timeline. The meetings. The coercion. The fake audits. Ms. Vance, she asked, her voice echoing in the silent room. Why did you sign the documents? The room held its breath. I looked at the jury. 12 strangers who held the power of God. Because I was weak, I said clearly. Because I thought power was the only thing that mattered. I thought I could trade my soul for a corner office and buy it back later. I paused. I looked at Richard. But I learned that some things once sold can never be bought back. You have to steal them back. The cross-examination was brutal. Richard's lawyers tried to paint me as the mastermind. They called me a liar, a thief, a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. They tried to use my past against me. They brought up the poker game, the fire at the marina. Ms. Vance, you admitted to arson and theft. The defense attorney sneered. Why should the jury trust a criminal? I leaned into the microphone. Because I'm the only one here who isn't hiding behind a retainer, I said. I did those things. I broke the law to expose the truth. I am a criminal. But he, I pointed a finger at Richard, is a murderer. He killed a town for profit. I just burned a trash can. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified for 4 days. I unraveled the sweater of his empire thread by thread. I explained the shell companies. I translated the ledger. I connected the dots between the poisoned water in North Creek and the diamond watches on the wrists of the police commissioner. When I stepped down from the stand, I felt lighter. The weight was gone. The secret that had been crushing my ribs was out in the air, toxic and visible. Rachel sat in the front row every day taking notes. Her series of articles, The Sterling Collapse, had already won a Pulitzer nomination. We didn't speak in court. We just nodded. A silent pact between soldiers. The verdict came on a Tuesday. Guilty. On all counts. Fraud. Racketeering. Conspiracy. Money laundering. The judge read the sentence. 25 years in federal prison. Richard didn't react. He just stared at the table. He was 70 years old. It was a life sentence. As the bailiffs led him away, he stopped. He looked at me one last time. There was no anger in his eyes. Only confusion. He still didn't understand how the pawn had taken the king. I watched him disappear through the side door. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I felt peace. The silence in my head was finally broken by the sound of the gavel. Justice wasn't loud. It was quiet. It was done. 1 year later. The office was small, but it was mine. It was on the second floor of a brownstone in Lincoln Park. The sign on the door was simple. Vance Consulting. Crisis Management and Whistleblower Protection. I didn't have mahogany desks or marble floors. I had brick walls and a coffee machine that worked. I had a client sitting across from me, a young engineer from a pharmaceutical company. He was shaking. He had a flash drive in his hand. They said they'll fire me, he whispered. They said I'll never work again. I stood up. I walked around the desk. I wasn't wearing a $2,000 suit. I was wearing jeans and a blazer. I looked him in the eye. They will try, I said. They will try to scare you. They will try to bury you. They will take your money, your reputation, and your peace of mind. I took the flash drive from his hand. It was warm. But they won't win. Because you have something they don't have. What's that? He asked, his voice trembling. You have me, I said. I walked to the window. It was raining outside, washing the city clean. I saw my reflection in the glass. The fear was gone. The naive girl who wanted to be a partner was dead. She died in a holding cell. She died on a balcony ledge. The woman looking back at me was different. She was scarred. She was harder. She was made of steel and surviving. They thought they could crush me. They thought they could use me as a scapegoat and throw me away. They didn't know the rules of the game. They didn't know that when you burn a phoenix, you don't get ash. You get fire. I turned back to my client. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of the wolf at the door. But this time the wolf was on the right side. "Let's get to work," I said.